Welcome. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation series, Best Practices to Design a Successful Virtual Onboarding Program. Jennifer Knibbs, National Director of People and Culture at Numeris, will share what went into the design of their award-winning virtual onboarding program and how it ensures new hires are prepared to hit the ground running in their new roles. We'll cover why companies are reimagining their onboarding experience, the role of onboarding in creating positive candidate experience, and how onboarding contributes to building a culture of community and connection. Our moderator today is Cara Danielson, SVP of Leadership Development Programs at LHH. Over to you, Cara.
Thanks, Honesty. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Cara Danielson, SVP for Leadership Development Programs at LHH. For those of you that are new to LHH and our conversation series, at LHH, we help companies see the possibilities in people through assessments, coaching, upskill, and transitioning. Companies can realize the untapped potential within their workforce, resulting in increased productivity, morale, and brand affinity. In our conversation series, we'll talk with business leaders on how they're turning innovative ideas into action. Joining me today is Jennifer Knibbs, National Director, People and Culture at Numeris, an audience measurement company with over 1,000 full-time and part-time employees. Jennifer leads a large team of professionals which focus on advancing the talent agenda where people are in the forefront of design and delivery of all programs and services. She's really, truly passionate about the end-to-end employee journey and all the experiences in between. With a pinch of culture and a dash of people strategy, she's willing to share her secret sauce and help other business leaders thrive in this new virtual world. To kick off the conversation, we want to do a quick pulse check of our audience and see where everybody is on the journey to creating a virtual onboarding program. We're going to bring up a poll and be able to share with you and the results shortly. So if you haven't had an opportunity to do so, please answer the poll now on the pulse check. So the question really is, how far along are you in your organization in building a virtual onboarding program? The first response is, we haven't started yet, but plan to do so. We have no current plans to move to virtual. We've completed about 25%. We've completed about 50%. We've completed about 75%, or we have already completely shifted to virtual. If you can please answer the poll now, it'll give us a good sense of where you are on your journey, and it'll help us in the conversation with Jennifer shortly so we can really kind of address where you are on your journey. So as the answers are starting to come in, I'm noticing that a good many of you have started the journey. You maybe aren't all the way there yet. It'll be interesting to see once the poll's finished to see where we land. So it's really interesting. Hopefully everyone can see on my screen what the results are, but let me just share those with you. So we have about 22% of people that are saying that we have not started the journey but plan to do so. We have about 4% of participants today who have said there's no current plans to move to virtual, that you plan to still keep the onboarding journey really face-to-face. We've completed about 25%, so there's a good amount of people that are on the journey so far. Looks like that's where really the majority of people are today. We've completed about 15% is 17, and we've completed about 75% is 15. And we have about 25% of the participants today that have completely shifted to virtual, which is really exciting. And I know that it really helps given today's situation with the pandemic and as we move more into a virtual world. So thanks so much for sharing your insights around that. We're really excited to talk to Jennifer and learn a little bit more about the work that she's done at Numeris, get her to share her story with us today. So welcome, Jennifer. So Jennifer, you're here with us today to share what you've learned about designing an award-winning virtual onboarding program. Given your virtual environment, your decision to completely reimagine your onboarding program and to take it virtual was really precedent. You were way ahead of the curve. We'd love to hear a little bit more about what was the business case and what really was the impetus for you to turn your onboarding program into a virtual design.
Sure, thanks. I think at the time our focus had really shifted and we were really focused on employee experience and all of the drivers surrounding that. we were also at the time on a path of automation. So the onboarding piece really fit with both of those pieces. From an employee perspective, we wanted the employee to have a very seamless end-to-end experience as part of onboarding. And we really wanted to put them in the driver's seat. On the business side, it was a time when we really started to hone in on the metrics around us. So we looked at engagement, we looked at our productivity index, and we looked at turnover. We did some of our own analysis internally, and we also looked to external benchmark data to determine sort of what that cost of turnover looked like. And we came to realize that we were spending around 20% of a salary per head count. So from a return on investment perspective, there was certainly a business case there to move forward with a program such as this. It was also at a time where our president had started to talk to us about wanting to have a high performance culture at Numeris. And we were going through a lot of change. So when we really took a step back and thought about how do we achieve that when we know it takes 6 to 8 months for a new hire to really get up to speed? How can we potentially expedite this process through something like this onboarding journey? So at the time, it made a lot of business sense and there was a lot of value there. Fast forward to where we are today, and certainly when March came to be and the pandemic and we were all leaving our offices in the comfort of, the fact that we had this onboarding program already in place was exactly what we needed. There's been so much focus from an HR perspective on this concept of reimagining the workplace and all of the pieces that encompass that, be it health and safety and mental health in the workplace. So having this onboarding program for us has been a gift. We've also increased the hiring, whereas I know many organizations have put that on pause. We were in a situation where we were hiring more employees than we ever had before. So all of this fit really nicely from a timing perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, Jennifer. So it sounds like it really aligned to your strategy in terms of where you were going as an organization, but the timing really was beneficial to you, kind of given the pandemic really would put the brakes on in-person onboarding for you. You were really prepared to meet the challenge. I'm sure that everyone who's on the call today would really love to learn a little bit more about what it took to build the program, maybe a bit about the challenges that you faced along the way, and how you were able to ensure that Numeris really never missed a beat. So reimagining onboarding is, for virtual is certainly a big undertaking. So what kind of steps did you take to begin?
Well, I think what we had to do initially was really think about the strategy and what we wanted to achieve out of the program. And it really, in simplest terms, was really about how do we inform, how do we involve, and how do we include. And what that really entailed was thinking about what information that employees really needed to know during what I'll explain a little later is that 100-day journey, and all of the pieces and training they would need to really feel like they have all the knowledge to get up to speed. The inclusion part is really instrumental because employees in a virtual setting are not going to have the same opportunities as in-office employees. So in-office employees are able to make those organic relationships very naturally. There's that proverbial water cooler conversation that happens when you go and fill up your coffee. You can go and drop a form off at the finance department and strike up a conversation. Virtual people aren't going to have those organic opportunities or to be able to build those friendships. So it's really important that people think about how do we create these experiences through a program like this. And although they may be somewhat more manufactured, they certainly have to be based on authenticity. That's very key. And the involvement part was also paramount because all of the stakeholders have to be a part of this program. From my personal experience, whenever there's been a program that sort of has, it's an HR initiative, it doesn't quite get the same traction. So you really want to ensure that your program is positioned from a corporate lens and that you have the right people in place. So whether it's the vice president of the department, the manager, the employee is driving much of the experience. And then we build in those people and culture touch points throughout the journey. So you're really encompassing those three components. And once you've got that strategy down pat, you can start to formulate what are all the pieces to underpin this? How do I get down to the tactics of all of this and really build something out and matching all of those pieces up to those to that strategy.
That's really great, Jennifer. I love kind of the way that you've described involving all the different people along the journey, and I think that's so critical. So how does this really support your overall people strategy?
That's a really good question. Well, for us, our people strategy and our business strategy really go hand in hand. And we have spent a lot of time on various facets of that strategy. And when I think about the talent acquisition piece as an example, and how we want to really enrich that candidate experience, we've put a lot of time and effort into that process. And we've really wanted to reshape that. And what we've come to see is that employees expect a lot more, and that things like compensation and benefits are really just table stakes. And what they want to know is, what is this experience within this organization going to mean for me? And they're going to decide really quickly what that looks like for them. And within the first 6 months, if it isn't what they signed up for, they're going to be looking elsewhere. And that won't bode well for your retention strategy. So we really wanted to ensure that when we looked at onboarding, it was really an extension of that talent acquisition phase. And for me, it's almost like the middle puzzle piece where you have talent acquisition on this side, and then you have the employee journey on the other side. And it really, for me, is the bridge between those two pieces, because you want to be able to get people up to speed, and they also have to understand what the programs are. So we've had circumstances in the past whereby people didn't know that there was goal setting or development planning because that conversation wasn't had. So when you're building all of these things into your onboarding, it really serves as that journey piece and pins everything together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is really important. And, you know, from what we know, I think people really make decisions quickly about whether they're a fit for the organization that they've joined. So onboarding becomes really critical to the employee experience, and the fact that you're thinking through all of these really critical pieces are so important, and not leaving them to chance. And I think, you know, the role of their leader in, you know, understanding what's required of them is so critical. So it sounds like you've done such a great job about including all those things. So let's move to the next question. And it's really around, how did you bring this to life, and what tangible steps can people take to build this into their organization? So just a little bit about your virtual onboarding program and the things that you've done.
Sure, sounds good. So we really wanted to look at this and think about this end to end. So really it starts almost as what I would describe as the pre-boarding state, where you want to, just in a way you keep candidates warm, you want to keep your new hires warm. So we've got this place in between talent acquisition and first day where we provide them with certain pieces of information or things to do. So some examples may be they're reading through the handbook, they're filling out all their paperwork. We provide them with a virtual e-welcome card. And we also get them to fill out a little all about me sheet. And that's really just a fun way to start integrating into the culture. From there, we provide them with some e-learnings, and then they do the 100-day toolkit. The 100-day toolkit is really the crux of the program, and that's really the information piece. So they have the first day, 30-day, 60-day, and 100-day journey. We have two streams. So there is a stream for individual contributors, and then there's a second stream for leaders. Both are somewhat similar. The exception would be that for leaders, we have layered in some additional pieces that they need to really hit the ground running as leaders within our company. And it could be things such as, how does compensation work? How do I follow the rewards and recognition program within the organization? The employees are doing training at different intervals, they're filling out information, but they're guiding themselves. And then what we've done is we've layered in those checkpoints. So we have a follow-up with talent acquisition. We have a follow-up, meet your HRBP. And we've set it up in such a way that they have to set up meetings with their leader, with the VP. So they're meeting all of the key people through this 100 days. That's really important. Another piece of this program is the welcome session, and these are a lot of fun. I actually did a couple of these this week. Typically, we do them on a quarterly basis, but given the mass amount of employees that are coming through the door, we've actually increased the amount of sessions. And this is just an awesome opportunity for employees to understand how do they fit into your big picture. So our VP will come in, they will give an overview of the direction of the organization, and then employees get to think about, how do I fit into that? Because that is why they're here. People aren't looking for jobs, they're looking for opportunities. And we provide them with an overview of our history. So for us, it's a really exciting thing to take people through. We have 80-year history with lots of different checkpoints and different milestones that we have achieved. And the sessions I did this week were particularly interesting because we got to pause as a group, and I said, this is another milestone within our history. This pandemic, the fact that we've hired 100 virtual workers over the last few months will be part of the timeline. So that was really exciting to the new hires as well. They get to envision themselves as part of something bigger. We talk a lot about values. And that's particularly important to me because from a virtual perspective, I really want employees to understand it doesn't matter whether you are working from your living room, whether you're working in the office. What matters is how you show up every day. And what matters is that you're part of something bigger, more than just yourself. So we talk a lot about our particular values and how they can emulate that through their day. And then we really hone in on various pieces of information, meaning that we want them to understand what resources and programs are available, especially during a time like this where everybody is at home. What mental health services are available? How do I keep myself motivated when I have small children at home? So there's a lot of different pieces of information that are very specialized or particularly geared towards this virtual way of working that have added a lot of value to the overall program. We also have a buddy system that we have layered into the program. And I want to emphasize how important having a buddy system actually is. And there's a really fascinating Harvard Business Review article from June of 2019 that really speaks to how having a buddy system in your program really enriches that employee experience, improves job satisfaction amongst new hires, and really drives engagement. So it may seem like something quite simple, but yet you want people to have somebody that they can go to, somebody that they can establish some form of a friendship with right out of the gate. So that's a really important component of our program as well. Because we've hired so many people in a mass setting of late, what we've sort of done to get around that is set people up in more of a cohort. And that's worked really well for us too. And then we wrap this entire program with data, and that is the driver. So what we do at the end is we have this lovely 100-day survey where we're asking a lot of pointed questions. Tell me about your experience. How is your relationship with your colleagues and with your leader? So we want to be able to take that data and decide, do we need to make any adjustments here to our program? And then we marry that data up with other data points. So we look at, so what does this look like in relation to our NPS score within our engagement? Well, within our organization, employees with less than 1 year of service have the highest engagement scores. So we can start to potentially make some correlations between different data points and also marry in some external data to help us make some decisions. So that is the program in itself.
That's great, Jennifer. You certainly have a comprehensive plan in place, and I noticed that people are starting to ask questions around some specifics. And just to let everybody know on the call today that we will move shortly into a question and answer period where we'll try to answer some of your questions. I think people are really interested around some of the technology pieces, Jennifer, and what you're doing specifically, but why don't we just hold that until we get to the question and answer period, and then we'll get you to answer some questions about how you're enabling some of these pieces and how you're bringing it to life. So I think that's great. The other piece that for me really stood out and what I loved was when you were talking about really the Numeris story and your rich history and how you're really taking the time to help people understand how they're a part of that. and helping them to really see how they're fitting into the bigger picture and really making a difference for Numeris. And I think for people, if we really want to kind of engage the hearts and the minds of people, making sure that people understand how they're making a difference is so critical. And that sounds like it's really foundational to a lot of the work that you've been doing there. So that's pretty exciting. I think, the role of onboarding is so critical to creating a positive candidate experience, and we've talked a bit about that already. What are some of the outcomes you've achieved? I know you've talked a bit about your the data that you're using and how you're able to kind of glean information from that, but could you talk a little bit more about what are the outcomes you've achieved and what kind of difference this has made for both the individuals in the onboarding journey as well as the company overall?
I think it's had a lot of positive outcomes for sure. I mean, before the pandemic, we were sort of testing this out on a smaller scale because we hired a couple people here and a couple people there. Since the pandemic and hiring over 100 virtual workers, it's been a great test to see whether or not this program actually is successful, and we've received so much positive feedback. I think we've achieved a lot. I mean, certainly being a Brandon Hall recipient and winner is a great achievement, but I think success comes in different forms. And for me, the employee feedback is just as important. And an interesting story, we recently just hired a gentleman that has a physical disability, and he sent us an email and said, this is the first time in a decade where I've been working virtually that I've ever received some of the information that you provided. So just things like, how do I deal with loneliness or isolation, feelings of isolation in the workplace, or how do I set up my workstation from an ergonomic perspective when I'm at home? So just these little pieces that really resonated with me and made me feel like we were definitely on the right path when it came to all of the small details. So I would say that our program is very robust, but it also is very simple. It's something that anybody in any organization can take and adapt to suit their environment. But again, it's going to depend on what works for you, how to scale this, your own culture. You'll have to layer in all of those pieces and considerations.
It's really great. Thank you, Jennifer. So that concludes our question and answer period. What we want to do now is really open up questions to the group on the call today, and we're noticing that some questions are starting to come in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start opening up those questions now. So if you haven't had an opportunity to do so, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. And we're going to try to get to as many of them as possible. You have some really great ones here. So as I mentioned earlier, Jennifer, I think that there's a lot of questions around the platform that you're using and how are you tracking each task during each phase. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you're doing that?
Sure. So in terms of the platform, what we've done is we've tried to leverage different tools. So the toolkit in itself is actually quite simple. It's a PDF that's electronic, and all of these forms and trainings, they all sit behind the either day 1 to day 100. We also leverage tools like Microsoft Teams, Skype to do our large scale meetings. So what we've done is we've taken all these pieces and we've pinned them into our learning management system. So we've created sort of a journey within there where employees have a one-stop where they go and complete everything. And all of our paperwork is also electronic. So we leverage our HRIS system to have a completely paperless experience. So there's end-to-end, everything is virtual.
That's really great. And so for a company who has a 30-day foundation program, but really wants to scale up to a 60 or 100-day program, which you're doing at Numeris, what do you think should be essential in the implementation to really build it up to that 100-day program?
Well, I guess you have to look at where you're starting, as you mentioned, and then figure out where the gaps are and what's missing. For us, it does build. So where we start off around the 30 days with things like legislative training, forms or information that they need to fill out, it builds to how do I participate in the culture at Numeris? What's the mentoring program? So we've taken all of our programs and we've built in information. That way, when they do transition out of the 100 days, they have a sound understanding as to how everything works, and it's not a surprise to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's quite a few questions that I'm noticing, Jennifer, around when we're asking people to do work pre-hiring, such as things like onboarding. Are you having challenges getting people to do the work before they start? So that's the first part of the question. And then, is there any concern about getting paid and not, or alternatively, not getting paid?
This conversation comes up quite frequently. So I would say that for the most part, we leave this as optional. It's up to them. If they want to complete all of this on day one, that's also up to them. But I think for the most part, people have been very keen to start working on things at their own pace. They've actually asked us in a lot of instances whether they can start in advance. So we leave that up to the candidate to really decide, or the employee to decide what works best for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think in my experience with onboarding programs, I think people are often very keen to do things before they start, because it really sets them off on the right foot. I think, all employees, before we start at a new organization, sometimes we have some concerns about, what's going to be required of me on my first day. And I think it oftentimes can really alleviate some of those concerns. So it sounds like that there are people in your organization that are realizing the benefit and are taking you up on that. And that's awesome. So for the welcome sessions, you do on a quarterly basis. Is that for all of the company to join, or do you just do a specific team or a department that the new hires are working in?
So it's for all new hires, and we mix and mingle the new hires that have been hired within the quarter together. So that also affords an opportunity for people to meet folks outside of their own area, which in this situation is great, because again, they won't have those opportunities to bump into people in the hallways. So the more people they have the opportunity to get to know, the better.
Yeah, that's great. So Jennifer, there's some questions around continuous improvement. And as we all know, things change, and the pandemic, I'm sure, changed a little bit about some of the things that you originally had done in the virtual process. So do you have a process in place around governance for updating and improving, and how have you handled that over time?
At the point of the pandemic, we definitely went back to take a look at the program to see whether there were any tweaks that needed to be made. At the time, prior to COVID, we had one of our coordinators that was facilitating part of the day one orientations. And what we did was we took those experiences and we virtualized them and created e-learnings, and then we uploaded those into the LMS. Because of late, we've also hired a lot of the same types of roles, which made the quarterly welcome session in these instances look a little different. We did tailor some of that content towards those employees, so it was more applicable. So we have continued to look at things as we go along. I think we're going to have to do that with all of our programs, to be honest, since COVID. I think that what we'll see is that we're sort of going to be living in two different situations potentially, this virtualized world and what a hybrid model may look like if there's some semblance of reintegration back into the workplace.
Okay, good. So we have a question around, our HR group has been hit with responsibilities related to COVID, and I'm sure many of you can relate to that inside your organizations. And we're not always able to have the VP of HR or some type of similar role to do these welcome sessions. What do you suggest as a workaround to that, Jennifer, and what have you done?
Well, I think that as long as the person that is facilitating the session has the background, it's something that anybody could speak to. And you could also consider sharing potentially past recorded town halls as an example. I mean, nothing's better than hearing from the president of the organization. So if you're able to embed different pieces to compensate, I think that would work nicely too.
Okay. And further to that, so how have you kept line managers engaged in the program without turning it to an HR initiative? I know you spoke about that a little bit earlier and how critical it was, but maybe just a little bit more information around what you've done there, Jennifer.
Well, I think it's important that you set the stage with the hiring manager as to what their accountabilities are through the process. So the new hires are for them. It's their employee, and they really need to ensure that person's success more than anyone. So we want to bring them into into it early, and we want to outline all of the pieces that they are going to be responsible for. And we check in with them. We need to check in with them to ensure the employee is integrating well. If there are any stumbling points or roadblocks, how do we work together to really navigate those situations to turn things around in the best way possible? So we definitely want to outline who's accountable for what, and we outline what support we will provide to them as well. So even though it is very self-directed, it's not a left to your own devices type of program. It's very much inclusive, and we work as a team, but everybody has a part to play, and that's really important, because otherwise it does become an HR initiative, and these are corporate programs for the corporation, for the business. So that's something that everybody needs to be on the same page about.
Mm-hmm. So how many days or hours is recommended to have an onboarding program? Jennifer, do you have a sense in your onboarding journey how many hours that the program would be?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, there are quite a bit of hours associated with it, especially when you think about all of the training that is also embedded into this. So we have legislative training. We also have a lot of corporate training for privacy and security and different things that are important to us. So I think that's where having 100 days, which is really a little over 3 months to do all of this, comes into play. People can work on it at their own pace, in between their own timetables. And to this point, there hasn't been any situations where anyone came forward to say, wow, this is taking an inordinate amount of time. I think it's the right amount of time. And I think people are happy to do it because they're feeling confident. There's a lot of anxiety that comes along with being a new employee. And certainly in this virtual situation, there's additional layers to that. So the more information that people can be provided with, I think the better.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and Jennifer, from what I know about your onboarding program, it is really, a lot of the components are on demand and just in time. So for the actual employee themselves, there's a lot of information in there that they can just go get when they need it, which I think is so critical. Sometimes I think, when we build onboarding programs, we decide when people should get certain information. But what I, love about what you've done is you've really put all the information in the hands of the new employee, so that when there's certain things they need to get, they can go get them, and it's just in time to what's happening on their journey. So I think, to some degree, the answer to that could also be it's really dependent on the person, how much time they want to invest in when they want, but it's really critical to provide those tools along the way. So I think you've done a great job there. The other questions, and we're getting quite a few questions actually around the buddy system, and people are quite interested in what you've done there. So some of the things that we're hearing is, how do you start that buddy system? How does it work? So if you don't mind just talking us through a little bit more detail around that buddy system for people.
Sure. So on the leader side, we tap on the shoulder of directors. I myself have been a buddy to many of the new leaders within the organization. And what it is an opportunity to really give folks the lay of the land and really give them the insight that they need out of the gate to be successful, and offer your ongoing support to that person. Whenever they have a question about how something is done, they have somebody that they can go to. Or if they just want to have a virtual coffee and chat, which we do periodically as part of this as well, we set up some time just to chat and just to get to know one another. On the employee side, we also have tapped on the shoulders of different employees in different business units. And we like to match people up with people within their own business unit if possible, because they're going to be going through that journey together and working closely together. So we try to match them in that way. And it's really simple. You look to the managers to find out who possibly would be a good candidate for that. And it's surprising how much people want to be involved. We've given them coffee cards and different things to thank them for being buddies. But really, people who have been with the organization, that understand how the organization works, they want to share and they want to be a friend to somebody that is new. So it's an opportunity to really let new people know that they're not alone, that there's other people here that want to be friends and get to know them.
Yeah, I think that the buddy becomes really critical on the journey. And there's a lot of questions around the virtual piece around creating a buddy. And so Jennifer, has that really worked well for you during the pandemic? And are people connecting virtually?
Yes, they are. So we are leveraging Microsoft Teams for all of this, and they are setting up regular meetings virtually. So this has been a great test. The tools that are available, there are no limits. So you can certainly have those relationships. The only difference is you have to make the time. You have to put it in your calendar. You have to remind yourself to go to those meetings. It's a little less organic, but it's just as effective.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the questions that we had, Jennifer, was around, I know you mentioned earlier when you were asking the question, you were talking about the way that you were measuring the program, and you mentioned an NPS score. So we have somebody that would like a little bit more information about what is an NPS score and how are you using that?
So an NPS score is part of our survey data. It's a net promoter score, and really what it is it's one method of measuring. It determines how people feel about your organization and would they recommend you as an employer. So when I mentioned earlier that the cohort of less than 1 year is the highest, that tells me that something in that 1 year term, that 1 year process is working for this group.
Okay, that's good. So how many people are typically in your onboarding journey, Jennifer? I know you've said you've had a lot lately because you have been hiring quite a few more people, but what does a typical cohort look like for you?
Well, over the summer, we've had almost 100 people going through the program. The welcome sessions that we had this week were probably the biggest that we've ever had, up to 40 in one class, so that's quite big. Typically, they're somewhat smaller because we're hiring throughout the year, so people's journeys are starting at different intervals throughout the year. We may see a welcome session typically with around 15 people, which is a good amount for us, but as I said, now they've certainly increased. So I think this is very scalable. It really can work whether you have one person or you have 100 people.
Mm-hmm. And so as you've been going through the journey, you talked a little bit about survey questions. And so, I think our participants would love to learn a little bit more about the survey. Are you surveying the new hires throughout the first 100 days or at the end of kind of the 100 days? And also, are there managers also being surveyed?
So we're hiring right. We're doing the survey right at the end. So that affords us the opportunity to have that full picture at the end of the 100 days. We're not surveying the managers. However, we are touching base with the managers to get their input as to how this program is going and what that looks like. The questions are really geared towards understanding how they like the program, whether or not they're building relationships internally. It's really just trying to get a sense as to overall how their integration is going, how that assimilation has worked for them. And then we are looking at other data points to sort of determine what that story looks like.
Okay, that's great. As we've been talking quite a bit about the pandemic and how that's really affected your organization and the ability to learn virtually, is there anything specifically that you had to think about that you had to accommodate virtual learning? So just, just for people as they're starting to think about moving towards virtual onboarding, what's the first thing or what's something you would need to consider to turn something into virtual learning?
Well, I think you definitely do have to consider the different learning styles of people, because some people learn in a different way. Some people are very hands-on learners, some people are visual learners. So if your program is very self-directed, there could be folks within this journey that maybe need more touch points. So I think that's where the manager also comes into play and should be able to really articulate whether that person may need extra supports through that process. We're hiring a lot of different people, and we're a very diverse organization. We have a gentleman who's just starting with us who's blind. So we're going to have to figure out how to ensure that he has that good employee experience and make some accommodations to really suit and fit him in the way that he will need as well. So you will have to look at this from different perspectives. It's not a cookie cutter, but I think the crux of the program works, and it's just tailoring when you need to accommodate.
So Jennifer, you've really described quite a comprehensive program. You're using all kinds of mediums and modalities to bring the program to life. Do you do welcome kits or packages, something to the employee when they first start? And if you do, what would be included in that welcome kit?
Everything that we do now is virtual. So all the paperwork, the welcome card that they get, all the e-greetings, everything is virtual. The toolkit in itself, it's also virtual. It's geared towards our organization and its look and feel, but everything is automated. So there's nothing tangible that they're holding in their hands, but it's all available and in front of them.
And Jennifer, do you have any requirements, I guess, around badges or anyone needing to get on site? And if so, how do you handle that?
In terms of having people return to office?
Correct. Yeah. Is that something that you're having to concern yourself with at this point?
Well, the majority of us remain remote, even those that were office workers. We do have a handful of employees that have returned within the different sites, and we've worked out those kinks through facilities, and we have a process in place for people to complete certain forms and such to ensure that from a COVID perspective, everything is clear and good to go. So we have done that.
Okay, that's great. Great answer, thank you. How do you think this might work with a large department or an organization that has 10,000 plus people? It certainly worked well with your organization, but do you think that it could be scaled up to a larger organization?
I think that it could be scaled to any size. The reality is that because everything's virtual, as long as you have a place to have everything stored, you've got the virtual tools in place, you have everything that you need, whether it's a small company or 10,000 employees, I think it's definitely scalable. You need to just look at it to determine from a culture perspective what things need to be embedded in this, what information is unique. And if you have different business units that potentially have different paths to take, then that was a challenge that you'll have to consider and determine whether you have to have different variations of pieces of this. For us, it's one for everyone. So that will be a consideration for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Jennifer, we have a question from someone that's really interested around, do you prefer the virtual onboarding, or do you still, at one time you spoke about the fact that you used to do face-to-face. So what's your preference, and do you have a specific, some information around why that you might like one or the other?
Well, I think that both work well. I mean, personally, I have always enjoyed that face-to-face interaction. I've come from the office environment, so I've had to adapt to this new way of working just like everybody else. I think that it works, the model works regardless as to whether or not you're in office or you're virtual. And I think there's a place, depending on where things go with COVID and how things unfold. I think there's a lot of unknowns right now. So I think being able to adapt and being agile and just willing to take it as it comes is going to be really important. And from an HR perspective, we're the leaders. We have to demonstrate that we've got this and support everybody else along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really great insight, Jennifer. In our experience, and we work with a lot of organizations that are, have either worked on or in the past or are currently working on onboarding journeys. And I think I love what you said. I think there's a place for both. I think, there's real value sometimes in getting people together and really creating that experience. You talked about the water cooler experience, and there's real value in that. But I think there's also a real benefit to this virtual piece, and you hit on it really around making sure that tools are available to people just in time and when they need it. And virtually, it sounds like has really allowed you to be able to give people information just in time when they need it. So I think that's great. more around kind of that water cooler experience. We had a question around how do you now create that water cooler experience since you don't have the majority of people back in the office, and so is there a way that you're doing that today?
Well, we hope that outside of what we're doing in terms of the buddy system and these welcome sessions and then the checkpoints that we have built in, that the leaders are also really building in those one-on-one meetings and those team meetings with the staff. And that's going to be really important as we carry forward in this virtual world. We did the welcome sessions, as I mentioned, this week, and the response was amazing. Like, they loved getting together. They loved talking to us who are not in their regular department and just learning a little bit about who we are and what our journeys within the organization have been and what that's looked like. And I was honored to actually share my journey because I think it's very unique. And I want them to feel like they can have a path that suits them. If they are happy with what they're doing, then they're exactly where they should be. And that's really important as well.
That's great. So Jennifer, there's a few questions around maybe some challenges that you may have encountered as you were moving towards moving everything online. A lot of organizations may be facing concerns that this may be not something that their organization would align to culturally. And so how would you address that in terms of, were there some challenges along the way to, convince the organization that this is something you should do? I think you talked about a bit in the beginning around the fact that you had a digital strategy and that you were focusing on digital, but you certainly in the past, I think we're an organization where you brought people together. So how did you overcome those challenges and really getting everybody on board to think that we should move ahead with a virtual program?
I think it worked well for us even at the time because we had a very decentralized way and model. We had offices across the country, and people working in different time zones, at different shifts during the week. So in order to sort of bring all this together, having something virtualized really made a lot of sense. We didn't have to monitor who was going through it at what point in time. If you had this all virtual, then it could work for anybody, anywhere. So that was really important. In terms, we had several iterations of the program, and we made changes along the way, just as we have with any other program that we've designed or developed. I think for us, because we've had some call center employees hired as well, we wanted to make sure that where everything was kept and housed made a lot of sense. So we had to make some decisions around where maybe some of the pieces lived, if you will. Some would be in our corporate LMS, where other components may be in the learning system that the call center was using. So we did make some changes, and we have some variations in sort of how things are housed, but by and large, I think the buy-in was there. And we've always had a lot of support for our programs, as long as we can, certainly demonstrate that there's value and the return on investment. Our team has been very supportive of PNC and what we need to do.
That's great, and there's some real lessons to learn there. So people are asking some questions about tracking, and we know that there's a lot of different components to onboarding, and there's a lot of things that people need to learn. And you've talked about your 100-day onboarding journey. So how, in your LMS, I think, plays a critical role in that as well. Someone, talked about their team has been able to track outcomes, so they're not feeling micromanaged from the get-go. So what kind of things are you doing around the tracking, and, are people giving you feedback around that? Are they feeling comfortable that they're not being micromanaged?
Yeah, I don't think anybody feels that they're being micromanaged. I mean, we're honing in on ensuring that all of the legislative and compliance training that they need to complete gets done, and we track that within our HRIS system. We ensure that they're completing the program, but what that looks like is going to be an individual experience, and we're not honing in on every aspect to make sure that from A to Z they've completed everything. To your earlier point, whatever the experience is that they want it to be, then that's what it'll be. So we're hopeful that it's providing the value that we believe that it will bring to them, but it's their journey to have. And we're monitoring those outputs as well by way of the overall metrics and analytics that we follow.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So Jennifer, is this onboarding journey, is it available on mobile as well?
So it's not available on mobile. It is not.
Okay. So just, I think we may answer one or two more questions. We're kind of coming up against the end of the hour, so I'll ask a couple more and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
So let's see. We have so many questions here in the queue, and I want to try to get to as many as we can. So how long do you spend with the new hire on day one? And how long would you recommend that you should spend with them on that first day?
All the activities that they are completing on day one are also self-directed. We've taken what was the orientation program and we've automated that process. So we're doing a check-in with them, but primarily they're taking themselves through that day one experience, and then they're connecting with their leader throughout that day to ensure that they have everything that they need.
So their leader plays a really critical role in that day one, which I think
Most definitely
is so important. Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do for that person's leader to support them so that they have all the information that they need?
So as part of the 100-day journey, there's a component that is specific to leaders who have new hires. And within that, there are checklists, there are guides to really ensure that they have a good understanding of all of the pieces, and then they can follow it and use those checklists as well to ensure that everything remains on track.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece. I think, you know, a lot of times in organizations, leaders may not onboard everybody, people every day, every month, sometimes within a year. And so to have all that at their fingertips, I think has made that really successful for you. Really quickly, Jennifer, and this will be the last question, which LMS are you using?
So we partner with Skillsoft, and their platform is called Precipio, and we are huge advocates and fans of them. So we are able to upload our own content, which we do regularly. So there's a hybrid of both the provider content as well as our own that we can have as sort of a one-stop LMS shop. So it works really well for us.
That's really great. Well, I thank you so much for all of your time today, Jennifer, for sharing the Numeris story. I know it certainly was interesting for me, and I know that all the participants really enjoyed the time. There were so many questions that we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. What I can tell you is that within the next 24 hours, you will receive an article on how to onboard new hires virtually, 5 best practices that ensure success. So for all of you, hopefully there'll be some more information in there that will be helpful for you. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody for joining us today on the call, all the great questions and the participation. We enjoyed having you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Cara.